Well, I guess I'll just...
You might as well leave it. Hello, everyone. It's a bit high. I'd like to go ahead and get started. My name is Dr. Mike Bowen. I'm the Assistant Director of the Bob Graham Center for Public Service, and I'd like to welcome you all out to tonight's event, which is entitled When Bob Graham Became a Gator. I'd like to graciously thank, first off, the members of the Tau Epsilon Phi fraternity alumni who have graciously donated to make the Samuel Proctor Florida History Lecture Series a reality. This will be the 7th Samuel Proctor Lecture Series this year. The first 3 were a number of topics relating to education. This semester, our topics up until this point have been Florida water and the environment, a topic which will continue in the fall semester as well. Our speaker tonight, though, doing a special edition of the Samuel Proctor Lecture Series, is none other than Florida former Governor, former Senator Bob Graham. He really needs no introduction. Senator Graham will be discussing a little bit tonight about the history of the University of Florida and how it relates to the state. And so, with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Senator Bob Graham.
Thank you, Mike. It's a great pleasure to be here this Friday afternoon. I know you're gathered for a reunion. I wish you well. Whether you're going to be for the orange or the blue tomorrow afternoon, Florida will definitely win. I want to thank those of you from the TEP fraternity who have put up with Buddy Shorstein, and as has his brother for even longer, but have also responded to his and Stu's request for your participation in this lecture series. With so many people who are here, Sam Proctor was a dear friend and a tremendous influence on me, and this is an opportunity to remember all that he has contributed to us individually and to this university, and this passion that he brought to Florida history. To him, Florida history was not a collection of dates and incidents that have been largely forgotten. It was a flesh and blood human experience that has brought this state from being the kind of wilderness that we see around us in these beautiful paintings to one of the most vibrant parts of the United States of America. I'm going to share with you a couple of my favorite Sam Proctor stories. I wouldn't be surprised if you've heard these before. I apologize for that, but I like them so much that I want to tell them anyway. I want to also welcome you to the Akora. I will not give you a test, but the word Akora is a Timucuan Indian word. The Timucuans were the Indians that largely populated this part of Florida, and it means place of assembly. The purpose of this facility is to be a place where students, faculty, other members of the university community, and the general public can come. You may have noticed that there are students studying, at least they were 5 minutes ago, in those pods. And when we have a full house, they become somewhat the orchestra seats for our event. We have a regular series of activities in this facility. We've had thus far this year something, Mike, how many programs have we had this semester?
We have one more scheduled for Monday, and after Monday's event, we will have had 19 Graham Center programs.
Yeah, so we've had an aggressive program here, and then during the day, this is organized around tables and chairs where students can come, they can eat lunch, they can put up their laptops and use it as a friendly, open place to congregate. So we're very proud of this. We're proud of the Graham Center, which has its headquarters up on the second level, which has as its mission to promote the next generation of effective and honorable public and civic service for Florida. We have now some 30 students currently enrolled, and we've graduated about 10 or 15 from a program called Public and Civic Leadership, where students learn some of the foundations of effective public activities, such as ethics, communications, economics, critical thinking, communication skills, and Florida history. Because I'm a great believer that you can't lead people into the future unless you've had some idea of how you've gotten to the present. Another principle of Sam Proctor. So I would encourage you to spend as much time as you like here, get to know what we're doing. I know a number of you, and I'm looking at Stu Newman, have been very supportive of this program, and I welcome others to join us. The University of Florida has had a tremendous impact on my family. I did a count recently, including my mother's family, and I believe the first University of Florida student from my family was my mother's older brother. Now, my mother could not come to this institution because she was female, obviously, and up until the late 1940s, of course, this was an all-male institution. But my mother had one brother whose name was Daniel Simmons, and he did come here. His claims to fame were that he must have done well enough to get admitted to a medical school because he subsequently became a physician, and I believe he went to Tulane Medical School. And second, he was the catcher on the UF baseball team that Spencer Holland was the pitcher. So that was a little while ago. But in total, there have been 17 members of my family have attended the University of Florida, and I hope a fair percentage of them actually were able to graduate. My first encounter with the University of Florida occurred exactly 46 days after I was born, on November the 9th, 1936, when my older half-brother, Phil Graham, who had graduated from here the preceding spring of 36, gave me my first Christmas present, which was a cloth alligator, which he tossed over into my crib. I remember it as if it were yesterday. And attached to the cloth alligator was a sign that said, "Wait till next year." Those of you who've been Gators for a long time know that that was our hope for many, many years. In 1936, when Phil graduated, it was just the 31st year of this institution, which is some indication that by standards of many educational institutions, we are still a relative adolescent in terms of our institutional history. But it's been a colorful history. And at this point, I'm going to tell one of the Sam Proctor stories. If you've heard this story before, this would be a good time to take a nap. But if you haven't, I think you'll find it to be interesting. In the late 19th century, there were 6 institutions of higher learning in Florida which were receiving some form of state assistance. Remember, this was a Florida which had less than 300,000 population in the year 1900. The legislature in 2001 established the 7th institution, the Agricultural College of Osceola County, which was going to be a state-supported institute. If this sounds like a little bit like more recent Florida history of the legislature establishing institutions, and I won't talk about those 3 new medical schools, you can take it as you will. Also at about this time, another thing was happening. A famous American had come to Florida in the 1870s. His name was Henry Flagler. He was the second wealthiest man in America at the time that he came here. He came because his first wife had tuberculosis, and one of the standard prescriptions was to go to a warm climate. He settled in St. Augustine and quickly became very bored and decided that what St. Augustine needed was to be the Riviera of southern France for America, and that to do that it needed two things. One, it needed a first-class hotel that people would come to, and second, it needed a railroad to get the people to the hotel. So he proceeded to build the hotel, which today is the headquarters, the principal building of Flagler College in St. Augustine. At that time it was called the Ponce de Leon Hotel, and started building what became the Florida East Coast Railroad. Unfortunately, his success was not equaled by his wife's health, and she passed away. Flagler rather quickly remarried a flashy woman who had been we'll say it, a showgirl in New York, creating quite a scandal. And she moved down to St. Augustine, and rather soon after that began to display some peculiar habits and mental aberrations. And it was necessary by the 1890s for Flagler to have placed his second wife in a sanitarium in upstate New York, of where she stayed for the next 60 years. As it was said, when she died, she was very old, very rich, and very insane. In the mid-1890s, Flagler had as some of the guests at his hotel the Keenan family from North Carolina, where they had a daughter, Lil Keenan, who was about 35 to 40 years younger than Flagler, but they managed to fall in love and wanted to get married. Flagler had a problem. The insane wife in the sanitarium. He had a second problem. He was a resident of New York at that time, and the only grounds for divorce in New York in the 1890s was adultery. Well, his wife may have been old, wealthy, and insane, but it was hard to prove that she was also an adulteress. So, and Florida had the same law. So Flagler decided it would be easier to change the law in Florida than in New York, so he changed his residence, and in 1903 went to the Florida legislature with two things. One was $100,000 in cash, and second was a bill that had been written by his attorney to make permanent insanity a grounds for divorce in Florida for a 2-year period. The man he gave both of these to was named Mr. Brown. I don't know what his first name was. And at this point, Sam Proctor becomes the particular commentator, because Brown became the chief of staff of that wonderfully named Florida governor, Napoleon Bonaparte Broward, who, as you will recall, Sam wrote his PhD thesis on Broward and apparently interviewed Mr. Brown and got this direct story. Well, at the end of the 1903 legislative session, Flagler had what he wanted, which was the bill signed by the governor to make insanity a grounds for divorce for 2 years. And second, he got back $30,000. That kind of shocked him. And he asked, why did I get back the $30,000? And Mr. Brown told him it was because primarily the legislators in the Lake City area, although they voted for your bill, out of a sense of conscience, refused to take your money. So that made Flagler feel quite warmly towards the people of Lake City. Okay, now the stories are meeting. In 1904, Napoleon Bonaparte Broward was elected governor, and he ran on a platform, among other things, to drain the Everglades. He had his slogan was, "Water runs downhill, and if we dig enough ditches, it'll all drain the Everglades." And we're now paying several $billion to try to restore the Everglades. The second thing was he was upset about all these universities, particularly that latest agricultural college that had been created in Osceola County, and said that Florida, as a modern state, needs to have a modern system of higher education, and I will deliver on that. Well, he was elected, and at the 1905 session, that road that's right in back of us is called Buckman, is it Drive or Buckman Drive? Mr. Buckman, who was a legislator from Duval County, introduced the legislation to abolish all those 7 institutions and create 3 new institutions. One of those was to be called Florida Agricultural Memorial College, located in Tallahassee for African-American Floridians. The other was called Florida State College for Women, also located in Tallahassee, to be for white female Floridians. The third was the University of Florida, to be located at a site east of the Suwannee River for white males. This caused a tremendous fight to break out over places that were east of the Suwannee River, each of which wanted to have the University of Florida located in their community. The leading site was Lake City. Lake City had one of those institutions. In fact, if you go up to Lake City, there's a VA hospital, and some of the facilities at the VA hospital are the old campus of that pre-1905 institution. Flagler, becoming aware of this, saw this as my opportunity to show my appreciation for the people of Lake City for not taking my $30,000, and he made an offer of a substantial gift to the University of Florida if it were located in Lake City. Well, of course, Gainesville was one of the other competing places, and they knew they had to top Flagler, so they did it by saying, if the university is located here, we will commit that we will provide free water to the University of Florida in perpetuity. So the commission that was set up to decide felt that Gainesville's water was more valuable than Flagler's offer, and they decided for Gainesville. Well, this really ticked off Flagler, and he made a public display that he felt that the people of Florida were inconsiderate of what he had offered to do, and by God, he wasn't going to give a dime to the University of Florida at Gainesville. Well, at the same time, Flagler was divorcing his old wife and marrying little Keenan, and if you go up to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, you will see the Keenan Football Stadium, a beautiful facility. You'll see various buildings on campus named for Keenan. You will see you won't see them, but there are Keenan scholars at the University of North Carolina, all of which was financed largely out of the money Flagler made in Florida. We should be mad as hell about that. So Flagler began, towards the end of his life, to feel a little embarrassed about the fact that he had done this, and so but he was too proud to publicly recant, so he gave $50,000 to his business associate and physician in St. Augustine, a man named Dr. Anderson, and told him to give it to the University of Florida. He did, and if you go 2 blocks from here to the University Auditorium, you will see the Anderson Memorial Organ, which is the organ that was paid for with the money that Flagler gave to Dr. Anderson because of his embarrassment of the way in which he had reacted. Now, isn't that a great story? And that's a Sam Proctor special. which underscores the colorful beginnings of the University of Florida. The period of the 30s and 40s was a period of rapid change at the University of Florida. My half-brother Phil became a freshman here in 1932. 1932, of course, was the depth of the Great Depression. My father, who had come to Florida as a mining engineer to develop a sugarcane plantation in northwest Dade County, the plantation had folded up during the Depression, and he had gone into the dairy business. So 32 was a challenging year for Dad in losing the job that had brought him here, starting a new business, and financing his oldest son's commencement as a student at the University of Florida. Dad had occasion to drive up to Gainesville during the fall of 1932 and went by the SAE house, which Phil had pledged, and he asked one of the brothers at the house, "Where's my son Phil?" And the brother said, "Oh, he's right here. He's over there in the bushes." That made Dad a little curious, and he went over, and by God, his oldest son was drunk in the bushes at the SAE house. Well, that started a 9 months sabbatical from the University of Florida for my brother. My dad, feeling that he wasn't going to spend money on tuition to send his son to Gainesville to get drunk, and that the better education that my brother would get would be delivering milk on the early shift, requiring him to leave the farm at 3 a.m. in the morning. A few months of that convinced Phil that it was going to be much better for him to be a serious student than to deliver milk for the rest of his life. And so he came back to the University of Florida and was able to graduate with his class in 1936 and had good enough grades that he was able to get into Harvard Law School. And while he was there, he held the same position that our current president held. He was president of the Harvard Law Review. So he was a pretty good student. A number of times the University of Florida wanted to give Phil some kind of an honorary degree or other recognition for his subsequent life, which included being publisher of the Washington Post. But every time they thought about that, they looked at his freshman grades. And they were so bad that they never felt they could offer him an honorary degree. During this period from when Phil came, where the enrollment at the University of Florida was a little more than 1,000, over the next 15 years, the population burgeoned, particularly after World War II, when many veterans came back under the GI Bill to attend the University of Florida. By the late 1940s, the university had reached over 10,000 for the first time in its history. It had gone co-ed. There were also the beginnings of stirrings of expanding the university system beyond those three institutions that had been set up by Mr. Buckman and Governor Broward in 1905. In fact, my father was a state senator at this point in 1943, and he introduced the legislation to create a state university in Dade County, which would now be what's called Florida International University. In 1944, my father ran for governor. He was pummeled by his proposal to build a state university in Dade County and was accused of being excessively parochial and was only interested in Dade County, and he lost his governorship race. Alan Morris, the political editor of the Miami Herald at the time, wrote a column saying that the fact that Ernest R. Graham could not be elected governor proved that it would be a cold day in hell when anybody from Dade County got elected governor. Well, I got elected in 1978 as the first person from Dade County. January of 1979, at the inauguration, it snowed in Tallahassee. So the prophecy was confirmed. My second brother, who many of you know and who sadly has recently passed away, started at the University of Florida in 1942. Of course, the war was underway. My dad felt that if his son had a little bit of college, it would make it easier for him to become an officer in the Army. After one semester, he enlisted and became moved into the Army Air Corps and was a navigator on a B-29. He originally had planned on going to Michigan State, which is where my dad had gone, and was going to major in animal husbandry and come back and run the dairy. But the president of Michigan State, at that time a man named John Hanna, convinced my father that if you were going to live in a state, that you ought to attend for a significant period of your higher education some institution in that state. And that was sufficiently convincing to cause Bill, when he returned after World War II, to return to the University of Florida. And it was basically the same advice that then I followed a few years later when I was making my decision. And I will have to say that it was one of the best pieces of advice that I have had. For better or worse, I can say I would not have had the political career that I was able to have, but for the fact that I had established so many friendships and relationships while a student here at the University of Florida that were absolutely invaluable in that political career. When I started the campaign, people like Jack and Buddy were probably the first people in Jacksonville that I called. And after they laughed when I told them that I was getting ready to run for governor, they were extremely supportive. Robin Gibson in Polk County and people all over the state who I had befriended as a student here at the University of Florida were crucial to my success. The 1950s, which for many of us was our era here at the University of Florida, was a wonderful period for Florida. It was a time of general growth and prosperity. I don't think there could have been a time to have come into adulthood that was more pleasant, more rewarding than to grow up in Florida in the 1950s. Florida was emerging from its traditional reputation of being a poor, sort of marginalized state that was a long way away from any place else. I've said that there were 5 things that most affected the state of Florida during my lifetime, and those have been: 1, the development of air conditioning, of mosquito control, of pension and retirement systems that made it possible for people to come to Florida, the commercial jet, which reduced it from taking 24 hours to get to almost any place else from Florida down to a matter of 2 or 3 hours. And finally, Fidel Castro are the 5 things that are my suggestions as to the most fundamental change agents for Florida. Many of those were taking hold during the 1950s. The University of Florida during that period was continuing to play a role that has been one of its traditional roles, and that is as a, quote, Florida institution. The word Florida is almost more of a dream than a reality. I don't mean this in a disparaging means, but I think reality is that Florida in many ways is like northern Italy. It's a series of city-states that are located relatively close to each other, but don't really have much to do with each other. We have city-states in Florida where people who live in Jacksonville, for instance, have traditionally not known or cared very much about what was going on in Tampa, and people in West Palm Beach didn't know or care very much about what was going on in Daytona Beach. The University of Florida has been one of the few Florida institutions where young people, wherever they come here, spend 4 years or more, and they go back to their homes as Floridians. They have met people, they have gotten to know the full range of the state. That is a fundamental value that the University of Florida has brought to our state. I was a beneficiary of this, one in romance. In the fall of 1956, I was a sophomore, and I had some kind of a meeting at the Tigard Hall. I hope it wasn't a disciplinary call meeting. And as I was leaving, I walked down the steps, and there was this stunningly beautiful brunette coming up the steps. I knew her well enough to know her name, because we had been to rival high schools in Miami. I went to that superior academic institution, Miami Senior High School. People like Robin and my wife had gone to the considerably inferior Miami Edison Senior High School. So I knew them. I knew her, but not well. I asked her, Adele, what are you coming here to Tigard Hall? I knew that she was a freshman because she was a year behind me, and she said, well, I'm having trouble with C61, which was one of those C courses. And at this point, I faced a dilemma. As a Southern gentleman, I felt it was necessary for me to alert her to the fact that I had taken C61 the year before and had actually made an A in C61, and that I would be willing, as a sacrifice, to be her tutor. And she accepted my offer. And she's been tutoring me now for 53 years. It also was a time of politics. Now, as those of you who know something about my political career, one of the things that I have eschewed and refused to succumb to is the temptation to engage in gimmicks. Now, sometimes people have accused me of doing that. When I ran for governor, I took 100 different jobs, and throughout the campaign, there were people who said, he's not really serious about doing all those jobs. It's just a gimmick to get attention or newspaper coverage. That, of course, was not the case. And I had founded my political career on my early experiences here at the University of Florida, and I just happened to have located a couple of items which demonstrate my seriousness of intention and the high standards that I always set. This was the card that I handed out in the spring of 1956 when I was running for freshman honor court. And on the back of the card, it had my campaign platform to be an effective member of the honor court. And it was, I hate politics. That wasn't all. I also had a bulletin that we put up. You may remember during those spring elections, there was no tree safe from the nail of a political candidate to put up their sign. The trouble is there were so many signs that they all sort of blurred together. So we wanted to have a sign that would catch people's attention. And I'm pleased to say that this insignia has returned to political fashion, and in fact has become almost the staple of our current president. And here's how we used it in 1956. So, Let me just conclude, if I could, with a few things about the current challenges facing Florida, the role that I think the University of Florida will play in responding to those challenges, and then the role that each of us as people who benefited by our association with this university can play on behalf of both this institution and our state. President Obama is taking the position that during this period of economic crisis, we have not one but two challenges. One is to try to do those things that we can to get us through the crisis as expeditiously as possible. But second, that America's economy is going to be different on the other side of this crisis than it's been in the past. And we need to take some steps, particularly in the areas of a more efficient and affordable healthcare system, an energy economy that is not so foreign oil dependent, and investment in education as the key to the productivity and creativity that's going to be necessary if we are to maintain our level of prosperity. I think the same challenge is facing Florida. We have to have some strategies to manage through this crisis. And second, I believe Florida is going to be a different place on the other side of this crisis than it has been, that the next 20 years are likely to be significantly different than the past 20 years. One of the most significant things that happened in Florida's history occurred about the time that Henry Flagler story was going on, and that is America was entering the Industrial Revolution. They sent out invitations to all the states to join the Industrial Revolution. Florida declined its invitation. Florida is probably the least affected large population state in America by the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century. The fundamental reason for that is that there were certain requirements. There was some skin that you had to bring to the game of the Industrial Revolution. If you were Cleveland, you could bring the skin that you were on the Great Lakes. You were close to a cheap transportation system. You were not very far away from some major sources of energy, first coal and then later petroleum. You also had access to steel from the areas of northern Michigan and Minnesota. That's why Cleveland became a great industrial center. Florida had none of those. We didn't have any natural resources. We weren't close to any place. We didn't have any particularly cheap transportation system. So Florida declined the Industrial Revolution. What has substituted for the Industrial Revolution has been growth. I was recently in Australia, a place that feels a lot like Florida and has had some similarities in its history. One thing that impressed me, however, was the difference in our growth. In 1900, Australia had a population of 3.5 million people. Florida in 1900 had a population of 300,000 people. In the intervening 108 years, Australia has gone from 3.5 million to about 23 to 24 million. Florida has gone from 300,000 to now approaching 19 million. So comparing us to another relatively fast-growing area of the world, we've been growing on steroids in Florida. Growth has been our substitute for the Industrial Revolution as a generator of prosperity. I'm concerned that we may well be looking at a period where growth is less a factor. For the last 35 years, we've averaged in Florida 450,000 people moving in every year, 150,000 moving out, each one of those being subject to psychiatric examination as to why they would do such a thing. Births and deaths equal So a net increase of 300,000 people. If you look at the decennial census, it's almost eerie how much every 10 years we've been growing at 3 million people. I think that number is likely to be less in the future. One of the reasons is I think that there's going to be a period that's likely to extend beyond this immediate recession, in which it is more difficult for people who want to be mobile to do so, to be able to their home and take the money to move to Florida. And second, we've just about wrapped up the last group of Americans who had a defined benefit retirement system. People who worked for 40 years knowing that at retirement they were going to get a monthly check of an amount that was equal to the average of the last 5 years of their employment times the number of years they worked. Today, 2/3 of Americans who have a retirement system, it's a defined contribution. And in the last 6 months, a lot of Americans have lost 1/3 of that defined contribution system. Excuse me, but this is for the CPAs in the audience. So there's going to be less people, in my judgment, who will feel economically secure to make the move to Florida than we've had in the past. So I think we need to get ready for a different Florida at the other side of that crisis. Now, what does this say about the University of Florida? I think that different Florida needs to be one that accepts the invitation that we currently have for the new economy, the economy based on information and intellectual activities, where we have all of the assets that we didn't have for the Industrial Revolution. The new economy doesn't depend on coal or petroleum or steel or the Great Lakes transportation system. It depends upon human beings who are empowered to be creative and effective. Those human beings can live anywhere they want to. Florida is a very attractive place in terms of its natural environment for people to live. I think we have an opportunity to be a very significant participant. We have dabbled at it thus far, but we haven't really grasped it in the same way that, for instance, North Carolina has with its research triangle, or California with Silicon Valley. The key to those two states as examples has been their commitment to higher education. The research triangle defines 3 higher education institutions: Duke, UNC, and North Carolina State. Silicon Valley wouldn't be there but for Stanford and the University of California at Berkeley, feeding the intellectual fires of that innovative area. The University of Florida is the furnace for the intellectual fire that we need to have in Florida to develop an economy that will allow us to continue to be a prosperous state without being a state that's dependent on 300,000 new residents every year. That's going to be the challenge for the University of Florida, which is the largest, the most diverse, the most highly regarded intellectual institution in Florida. It's a role that's going to require the support of us in order to do that. I'm concerned about what's happened to the University of Florida in recent years. Since 1990, this is, I found to be a stunning figure, but I will testify that I've confirmed it. Since 1990, the average per student funding at the University of Florida in inflation-adjusted dollars has declined by over $4,000 per student. That is to say that today there's $4,000 less dollars in constant dollars than students were getting 19 years ago at this institution. That's taken its toll. We now have one of the highest student to faculty ratios in the country. We're now facing a potential loss of some of our best faculty members. In fact, I was just told earlier today about a very prominent member of the faculty of the College of Arts and Sciences who has left for the University of Michigan. The legislature is now debating whether they're going to cut the budget of the university $20 million or $70 million. And President Manchin yesterday announced what the consequence of a $70 million cut in the budget would be, and it is draconian. I think this is the tipping point time for this university. And thus, finally, we all have a role in trying to reverse this. I think that the University of Florida has some enormous political assets. It has in the hundreds of thousands of alumni, has 50,000 students, 7,000 or 8,000 members of the faculty. Those are lots of folks if they are effectively organized to become the political advocates for this great university. And I would hope that those of us as alumni, when the call comes for us to become involved in things as basic as inviting legislators to come and see this university. When I went into the legislature in 1968, almost half the members of the legislature had at one point in time attended the University of Florida. Today, it's down to maybe at best 20%. So 80% of the legislature hasn't had the kind of experience that we all had here, and the affinity and understanding of this university. And we need to carry the message to an individual legislator basis. Everyone in this room probably knows at more than just a handshake level some members of the legislature. We need to leverage that relationship on behalf of this university so this university can leverage its influence to shape the Florida that we're going to be living in on the other side of this economic crisis. So friends, I thank you for giving me the chance to have a very pleasant several minutes reminiscing about this institution and what it has meant to me, and an experience that we all share, and the responsibility that we now have at a special time of challenge for Florida and for the University of Florida. Go Gators. Thank you. It's normal when we have a Sam Proctor lecture for the lecturer to then submit himself to the slings and arrows of questions and comments by the audience. I would be glad to do that, or I will sit down and we can all have a drink or do whatever else we would like for the rest of the day. Any questions or comments?
You covered pretty well.
Yes, there is a gentleman in the back.
Governor Graham,
Oh yeah, Dave, good to see you. Dave, I'm sorry, but vanity has prevented me from putting on my glasses, so.
I carry mine in my pocket. This is Earth Week, and a topic that's near and dear to my heart is climate change. And I've been listening to a number of panels convened by the Green UF, a faculty here who have been engaged in this academic studies for many, many years, mostly in the natural sciences. And the mood of the group was pretty dismal, very pessimistic. And after listening to Governor Dean last night and thinking about this, it occurred to me that the Graham Center might be a way of bringing together the socio-economic elements on this campus with the scientific elements who are pretty frustrated right now with what they see as a lack of national, not to mention global leadership on this issue. And this Grant Center might actually be able to serve as a catalyst to do exactly what you said. So I kind of wrote up a memo to Bernie today and emailed it to him. I'd like to leave it with you to think about, which is the University of Florida Climate Challenge, which is how do we use this campus, this community, because we have a very progressive community here in Loudoun County and City Gainesville on these environmental and economic issues. And even Charlie Crist is now telling us that green is gold. And Larry Friedel is looking for a mission for the next session of legislature. And I'm thinking that we might be able to give him one, which is a way of bringing resources to this university and leveraging the private sector and the public sector interest in this issue. And I would ask you to think about that.
Well, thank you. And you mentioned Governor Crist. To show my bipartisanship, he gave me this tie. So I'm appreciative to him, and as a Scot, thank him for the cheap cost of this nice tie. This facility, Akora, is a facility that is open to the widest range of ideas and discussion. And we are considering doing a program in the next academic year on all of the issues surrounding the energy question, including the effects on global climate. As to the Graham Center itself, one lesson that I think I've learned is that in life, you can have a lot of ideas of what you'd like to do, but if you're going to be effective, you've got to set some priorities and concentrate on those things that you can actually impact at a high level of quality. And so we have selected 3 areas that the Graham Center is going to concentrate on until such time as we feel we have gotten out of swaddling clothes and we can start to consider taking on others. And those 3 are public leadership, preparing young people to assume positions of responsibility. Second, Homeland Security. We're going to be working with a variety of agencies in terms of how to enhance the security of our people. And third, the Americas. No part of the United States of America that's more influenced by the North-South relationships, the relationships that our president is dealing with today as he meets at the Summit of the Americas in Trinidad, than will be Florida. So those are going to be, for the immediate future, our 3 priorities. I'm sorry that we don't have all the ideas good ideas that others would suggest we take on, but we think it's important to be good at what we've decided to do before we try to be good at a wider agenda. Yes, sir.
2 comments on the lighter side. I remember back in the, I guess, late 40s, 50s in Dade County, there was Miami Senior High, Addison, Jackson, and several of us went to the school on the other side of the bay, Miami Beach.
Right.
And on the other side of the bay, Miami Beach High School. And I remember Miami Senior High would kill us in football everywhere. I think it was 1951. We tied Miami High 7-7, and that was a big celebration. The second comment, I spent most of my life in Atlanta since graduating. And my older daughter did her bachelor's degree at the University of Georgia, and the nickname of the Atlanta Gator Club, which is the 4th biggest and biggest outside of Florida, is deep in enemy territory. But I'm glad to hear the connection to Florida International University, because our oldest daughter did her master's degree at Florida International University.
Well, let me tell you, sometimes you can take solace in tie games. When I ran for governor, I made a number of solemn commitments to the people of Florida, one of which was that at last the University of Florida would win the Southeast Conference championship. We didn't get off to the greatest start. In my first year as governor in 1979, we opened with Mississippi State. and we lost. Then we played an out-of-conference team, Georgia Tech, and we tied. Then we proceeded to lose the next 9 games. So we had a record of 0 wins, 10 losses, and 1 tie. Now, I'm pleased to say that before my term was up, we in fact did win the Southeastern Conference, but then I have to put a postscript that some picayune recruiting violation caused them to take it away from us after we had won. But as far as I was concerned, we delivered. Yes, Stu?
Senator, I was asked by Buddy to keep quiet, but I can't resist the fact that as you reminisce...
I don't think Buddy is particularly surprised that you have violated his request.
Which leads me to the comment that some of us in this room were fortunate enough to have Dr. Proctor as a professor in Florida history. He approached us at one point when we were all in that class and asked us to take under our wing this young Gentile student who didn't seem to know his way around campus. And we all sat in the back of that classroom. I can see 5 of us here now that sat back. And we sort of debated amongst ourselves whether or not we could adopt this young fellow into our ways of life. And you lost 4-1. And
were you the 4 or the 1?
I was not one of the ones who wanted to embrace you. But anyway, needless to say, we did take you in under our wing. And to be serious for a moment, the relationship that the fraternity had with Sam as his basically extended family of sons. Prior to his passing, he shared with us the fact that you were just as much of a son to him as we were. And it just does us proud that we have the ability to make a contribution, whether it be financial or from the heart, to the Graham Center and to Sam's memory. And we just wanted you to know, as we can't take you in as a fraternity brother, unfortunately you belong to one that we have no great respect for. But we have always considered you one of us and one of our family, and we'll continue to do so.
Well, thank you very much. And immediately above me on the second level is the Sam Proctor Oral History Center, which continues in his name to recognize the importance of capturing Florida history today for the benefit of future generations.
One other thing you mentioned that made an impression on me tonight was we all went back to our home cities or wherever as a Floridian, but also as a Gator. And I can remember I was doing some work for CDC in Mozambique. And it gets cooler in the winter months, both in Africa. And I had a Florida sweatshirt on at a corner pub owned by a South African. And up came this guy, "Are you a Gator?" And this guy worked for the World Food for Peace program. And he had come to Maputo. He was up in northern Mozambique somewhere. And this was the biggest thing of his last year in Mozambique, was he ran into another Gator.
They're everywhere.
They're everywhere, just as the announcements say.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
One comment, I asked Sam one day, Sam Proctor, I said, "Sam, you've done so much, what are you really proud of in a nice way?" He said, "Really, one day I was asked to help unveil Governor Graham's portrait, Tallahassee, when he was leaving." He said, "I'm really proud of that." So I just thought I'd let you know.
Well, Sam was always compassionate, and only infrequently did he lose his good judgment, as a matter of fact.
I hope the fraternity brothers and any other guests will take some time before we leave tonight to maybe walk around the building and take a look at where we have the lecture series, the Proctor
Oral history.
Oral history program offices, and go by the Graham Center office, because this is a magnificent building. But the question I've got is, do you think it's the advice your dad gave you and as to spending time in the getting your higher education in the state you intend to live is as important today when we are dealing with a mega state of 18 million growing still at a significant pace as it was when we were in school now 50 years ago?
Well, probably the answer is not as much, in the sense that Florida is not as intimate a state. Even when we were here in the 50s, I think the population of Florida was about 5.5 or 6 million, just in that one area. So a student who is a Floridian thinking of where they want to come can find virtually any activity, any area of intellectual engagement that they want here at the University of Florida. Plus, we got Tim Tebow, too. Yes.
I served for 3 years as the president of the Scholastic Achievement Foundation for Palm Beach County. And annually, we honor the academic stars at the Breakers Hotel in Palm Beach. About 140 to 150 students per year. We ask each of those to come forward and tell us what they want to study and where they want to study. Annually, about half of them, University of Florida is their designated institution.
Get in.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, what's your think that the test of this is under the ever-increasing amount of grants from major corporations and the federal government? Does that show that this is a national university?
Yeah, that's a good indicator, because those are competitive. You know, everybody who has the essential capability of competing does, and when you win as consistently as the University of Florida has won, that's a good indicator of your quality. Friends, thank you very much. This has been a wonderful good afternoon. Best wishes. Yeah, I was sick of it.